My name is Eleanor Carter, and if you had met me last year, you might have thought I was just another quiet grandmother from Ohio, the kind who bakes pies on Sundays and never raises her voice. Tonight, sitting on a weathered bench at a deserted highway rest stop, I learned the truth about my own family, and I can promise you this: kindness has sharp edges if you force it to. The air smelled of diesel and burnt coffee. A flickering neon sign buzzed overhead, painting everything in a tired yellow glow. I still held a paper cup in my hand, lukewarm and bitter, the kind of coffee you drink only because you need something to hold on to. When I walked out of the restroom, I expected to see Daniel's SUV waiting near the curb, my son's car, gray, spotless, familiar. Instead, I saw nothing but the tail end of a tractor trailer sliding into the dark. At first, I told myself they must have driven to the far side of the lot. I paced up and down the sidewalk, scanning every pair of headlights that pulled away. Minutes stretched into half an hour. Hope, stubborn and foolish, kept whispering that this couldn't be what it looked like. But when the wind pushed hard against my cardigan and the parking lot emptied one vehicle at a time, I sat down. That bench carried the memory of storms, rough against the back of my legs, and I let myself feel the weight of what had just happened. People passed, glanced, and turned their eyes away. A boy in a baseball cap looked straight through me, as if I were invisible. I almost laughed at the absurdity. 71 years old, left like baggage by the people I had sacrificed most for. Yet my hand drifted to my purse, where a folded document rested in the inner pocket. A house lien, a piece of paper Daniel and Melissa thought was just a formality. They believed they had silenced me with abandonment, with cruelty dressed up as convenience. What they forgot was that signatures and ink can cut deeper than betrayal. That night, under the humming neon, I made a quiet vow. I would get home, and when I did, I would not arrive empty-handed, because they had left me on the highway, but I still held the deed to their house. When Daniel called me that spring afternoon, his voice trembled just enough to pierce my heart. He said the bank was circling, the mortgage payments overdue, the family in danger of losing the roof over their heads. I had heard stories like that before from neighbors, from friends at church, but never from my own son. He told me he needed $82,000, an amount so exact it felt rehearsed. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, fingers tracing the rim of my teacup, weighing a lifetime of saving against the fear in his voice. I had spent my life building security out of scraps, widowed early. I worked double shifts as a nurse and lived frugally. Every penny was tucked away for rainy days, for emergencies, for family. And now here was the storm, my own child pleading with me. I said yes, but I did it with a condition. I wasn't foolish enough to believe gratitude would last forever, so I asked for a lien on the house. The lawyer, Mr. Hall, explained it clearly. If the loan wasn't repaid, I had legal claim to the property. Daniel agreed quickly, too quickly, as though he couldn't wait to shove the papers across the table. For a few months, things felt almost sweet. They invited me over more often, Melissa smiling as if nothing had ever soured between us. The children, Olivia and Ben, clung to me when I arrived, tugging me toward their latest Lego fort or their chalk drawings on the driveway. I let myself believe that my money had not only saved their house, but also rebuilt the bridge between us. But little cracks began to show. Melissa's new kitchen renovation gleamed with imported tiles and stainless steel appliances. Daniel drove up one day in a sleek car that cost more than I had earned in my first 5 years of nursing. When I asked, he waved it off, said bonuses at work had been generous. Yet when I visit unannounced, I caught the sharp glance they shared, the way Melissa pulled her purse closer to her side as though my eyes could steal secrets. Phone calls dwindled, invitations dried up. I would leave pies on their porch, only to find the boxes untouched days later. It was as though, once the check had cleared, I was no longer flesh and blood but a relic they didn't want in their photographs. I told myself it was just busyness, that families go through seasons. But at night, lying awake, I felt the distance growing like ivy through cracks in a wall. One Sunday, determined not to feel like a stranger, I stopped by after church. Olivia met me at the door, her hair tangled from play, her smile wide. She tugged me inside before Melissa could say a word. That was when I saw the brand new entertainment system dominating the living room wall, the kind I'd only glimpsed in glossy magazines. Melissa stood stiff. Daniel avoided my eyes. The lie hovered in the room, thick as perfume. I didn't confront them. I wanted to, but I bit my tongue until it bled. I told myself keeping the peace mattered more than my pride, yet the seed had been planted, and I could feel it sprouting each time I replayed Daniel's desperate plea for money. The fear in his voice now seemed painted on, part of a script I had been foolish enough to believe. The breaking point came a week later when I invited them to dinner at my house. I made pot roast, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal Daniel had loved as a boy. They arrived late, the children restless, Melissa distracted by her phone. Halfway through the meal, Daniel leaned back and said, "Mom, you don't need to fuss like this. We're doing fine now. Really fine." The way he said it, careless, almost smug, landed like a stone in my chest. That night, after they left, I walked through my quiet house and opened the drawer where I kept the lien. The paper was still crisp, the ink still black, my name steady on the line. I ran my fingers over it like Braille, reading the future between the letters. They thought my role was finished, that I was just a bank account with a smile. But I knew better. The betrayal was no longer a whisper in the dark. It had taken shape, solid and undeniable, and I understood, with a clarity that chilled me, that the storm was far from over. Labor Day weekend came with the sticky heat of late summer. Daniel called that Friday morning, his tone almost cheerful. He suggested a family trip downstate, said it would be good for all of us to get away. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think maybe we could mend the cracks. Maybe long hours in a car would soften the distance. I packed a light bag, a cardigan, my reading glasses, and a small tin of mints I always carried for Olivia and Ben. The first hour of the drive felt deceptively normal. Olivia leaned against me in the back seat, showing me her drawings, while Ben kicked his shoes off and hummed to himself. Melissa tapped at her phone, scrolling endlessly, while Daniel kept the radio low. The landscape blurred into rolling fields, punctuated by gas stations and diners. I half remembered from trips decades earlier with my late husband. For a moment, I let myself drift into memory, the hum of the highway soothing as a lullaby. We pulled off at a rest stop along Interstate 77. The sign promised coffee, clean restrooms, and a gift shop full of postcards nobody really needed. Daniel parked near the side lot and announced they'd stretched their legs. I excused myself to use the restroom, telling Olivia to wait for me. She smiled and nodded, too busy licking the last of her ice cream cone to care. Inside, the harsh fluorescent light stung my eyes. The restroom smelled of antiseptic and old water. I washed my hands, smoothed my hair in the mirror, and felt that small flicker of nervousness I always carried when I sensed I was out of step with my family. When I stepped back outside, clutching my purse, the lot looked emptier. The SUV was gone. At first, I thought I was mistaken. I scanned every row, expecting to see Daniel waving me over from a different spot. My pulse picked up. I walked the lot twice, then 3 times, my cardigan slipping off one shoulder as the sun beat down. Minutes stretched, my throat tight. I called Daniel's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I sat down on a wooden bench near the vending machines, the slats rough against my legs. Trucks thundered past, their engines growling like distant storms. Families walked by, children tugging at their parents' hands, none of them sparing me more than a glance. A young man in a baseball cap met my eyes for half a second before looking away, as if he couldn't bear to acknowledge the woman abandoned in plain sight. Shame burned hotter than the heat. My own son had left me there, a deliberate act as cold as it was cruel. I replayed every detail of the morning, his forced cheerfulness, Melissa's distracted silence, the way he parked far from the entrance. It had all been staged. The realization sank like lead into my stomach. I could have crumbled right then. I could have cried until the asphalt blurred, but something steadier rose up inside me. I touched the purse at my side, felt the folded paper hidden deep in its lining. The lien. Proof that I wasn't just a helpless old woman. Proof that they needed me more than I needed them. As dusk fell, the lot grew quiet. The neon buzzed overhead, tired and persistent. I dialed a cab service from the payphone inside the gift shop, my voice calm, almost detached. When the driver arrived, he asked if I was all right. I nodded, climbing into the back seat with the dignity I clung to like armor. The ride home was long, the highway stretching endless under a bruised sky. I didn't speak, and the driver didn't press. I watched the dark swallow the edges of the road, thinking of Olivia and Ben, of their innocent smiles. They didn't know what their parents had done, and they didn't know what I was about to do, because betrayal may wound, but it also sharpens. That night, abandoned on a highway bench, I understood clearly. I had been cast aside, but I was not powerless. Not anymore. When I walked back into my own house that night, the silence felt heavier than usual. The old clock ticked on the mantel, and with each sound I reminded myself I was still standing, still thinking clearly. Daniel and Melissa had wanted to strand me, maybe even to shake me into giving up the lien I held. Instead, they had carved the betrayal into stone. I sat at my kitchen table, spread out the papers, and called Mr. Hall, my lawyer. His voice carried the steady calm I needed. "Eleanor," he said, "you're within your rights. If they've defaulted, you can move forward." I closed my eyes. It wasn't about vengeance alone. It was about survival, about dignity. I told him to begin the process. The calls from Daniel started the next morning. At first, he played the part of the apologetic son. "Mom, it was a mix-up," he claimed. "We thought you were already in the car." His voice wavered, but I'd heard enough excuses in my lifetime to know when they were painted over with lies. I stayed quiet, letting him spin his story until the mask slipped. By the third call, the tone changed. He was sharp, accusing. "You're really going to ruin us over paperwork? We're family. Blood should mean more than money." Melissa chimed in on speaker, her voice cutting like glass. "Do you really want to be remembered as the grandmother who took her own grandchildren's home away?" Their words twisted, meant to guilt me, to bend me. I set the phone down and let them talk to an empty line. I had nothing to prove. A week later, a knock sounded at my door. 2 women stood on the porch with clipboards. Child Protective Services. Someone had filed a report claiming I was confused, possibly unsafe around the children. I invited them in, offered tea, and answered every question with patience. I even laughed softly when they asked about my memory. "I remember enough to know when someone's lying," I said. To put the matter to rest, I underwent a cognitive assessment at the local clinic. The doctor, a kind man with silver hair, guided me through puzzles, questions, tasks meant to trip the mind. I passed cleanly. The report came back. Eleanor Carter, fully competent. That paper went into the same drawer as the lien. Still, I knew words and papers would not be enough. I needed the truth to stand taller than manipulation. That was when I hired a private investigator, a woman named Clara. She had eyes that missed nothing and a voice as calm as still water. Within weeks, Clara uncovered what I had only suspected. Daniel and Melissa were tied to a small network siphoning money from elderly clients, staging emergencies, funneling funds through fake accounts. The betrayal had grown roots far beyond me. Each new piece of evidence Clara slid across my table was both a wound and a weapon. I thought of Olivia's laughter, of Ben's small hands wrapped around mine, and I knew I couldn't turn away. When Clara leaned back in her chair one evening and said, "It's bigger than your son, much bigger," I felt both sickened and strangely strong. My family had left me on a bench by the highway, but here I was, building a case, brick by brick. They had tried to paint me as senile, as disposable. What they didn't understand was that every insult, every cruel act, only clarified my resolve. I was not simply a mother discarded. I was the woman holding the thread that could unravel their entire scheme, and I was ready to pull. The first real crack in their scheme came on a gray Thursday morning. Clara, my investigator, called and told me she had intercepted a message. Daniel was meeting a so-called advisor at a roadside cafe just outside Akron. "It's a handoff," she said. "If we move carefully, we can catch it in the act." I felt my hands tremble as I slipped on my coat. For months, my son's voice had haunted me. Each lie knotted into the next. Now there was a chance to see him unmasked. Clara coordinated with local police and an FBI contact, people who had been following the trail of stolen accounts across state lines. All they needed was proof. The cafe sat at the edge of a service road, a squat building with faded red paint and a neon sign that blinked open, even though it looked half asleep. I arrived early, slipped into a booth in the corner with Clara beside me, and ordered black coffee I barely touched. Through the smudged window, I watched Daniel's SUV pull in. My chest tightened at the sight of him. My boy, once so small he used to fall asleep on my chest after nightmares. Now he carried secrets heavier than I could bear. He walked in, confident. Melissa at his side, their laughter thin and hollow. They slid into a booth across from a man in a press suit. I strained to hear but could only catch fragments. Clara nudged the small recorder closer. Daniel leaned forward, voice low but distinct. "We've got another account lined up. My mother's paperwork covers us if anyone asks. She's easy to keep quiet." The word struck me like a slap. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay still. I needed to hear it, to let him bury himself. Melissa smirked, tapping her manicured nails against the table. "She's harmless. Old women want company, not battles." The man nodded, sliding a folder across the table. Clara's eyes flicked to the police officer waiting outside, the signal already given. In that suspended moment, time slowed. The hiss of the coffee machine, the squeak of a waitress's shoes, the pounding of my own heart. Then the door swung open. 2 FBI agents and local police rushed in, firm voices cutting through the air. "Hands where we can see them!" Chairs scraped. Customers gasped. Daniel's face drained of color as officers pulled him to his feet. Melissa protesting, her words dissolving into chaos. I stayed in my booth, hands wrapped around the cold mug, watching as the scene unfolded like a play I had waited too long to see. Daniel's eyes met mine across the cafe, a flash of disbelief, then fury, then something close to fear. I didn't look away. They led him out in handcuffs, Melissa following, both shouting about misunderstandings and conspiracies. But the folder, the recording, Clara's months of evidence, none of it could be undone. When the cafe door swung shut, the silence that followed felt almost holy. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The weight of years, of sacrifices ignored, of trust shattered, lifted just enough for me to feel the ground beneath me again. Clara touched my arm gently. "It's over. Eleanor, you did it." I looked at the empty booth where my son had sat, and though my heart ached with a grief that had no cure, I also felt something sharper, cleaner, justice. They had left me on a highway bench, certain I would fade away, but here I was, watching the door close on their arrogance, reclaiming not just my voice, but my place in the story. And in that moment, I knew the true climax was not their arrest, but my refusal to be silent. The seasons turned, and with them came a gentler rhythm. The courthouse had its verdict, the papers were filed, and Daniel and Melissa faded into a chapter I no longer needed to reopen. What remained was life, quieter, slower, yet richer than I could have imagined. Each morning I brewed coffee and let its warmth settle into my bones. Upstairs, Olivia and Ben argued over whose turn it was in the bathroom, their voices rising and falling like an off-key duet. It was ordinary, gloriously ordinary. My sister Helen would shuffle in behind me, hair still tangled from sleep, and together we would prepare breakfast. There was comfort in the clatter of spoons, in the way Olivia always asked for extra syrup, in Ben's habit of hiding toast crusts in his napkin. In those small rituals, I felt myself healing. I had been cast out, humiliated, left behind in the most literal sense. But now, I was building a life where I was wanted, where my presence mattered. The lien and the court filings, the sting of betrayal, they were still part of my story, but they no longer defined it. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old drawer, I came across the folded deed. The ink was still bold, my name steady on the line. I thought of how that single sheet of paper had once been my shield, my only proof of power. Now it felt more like a relic, a reminder that I had chosen not to be silenced. I slipped it back into the drawer, not out of necessity, but respect for the woman I was that night on the highway bench. Every so often, we drove past that rest stop on our way to the park. The bench was still there, weathered and splintered. I would glance at it, feel the echo of cold wood against my legs, and then turn back to the sound of Ben laughing in the back seat, Olivia humming to herself. What once symbolized abandonment had become a marker of resilience. The truth is, living well became my answer, not the court case, not the headlines, not even the arrests. It was in the steady presence of family dinners, in helping Olivia with her school projects, in cheering for Ben as he swung a bat that looked too big for his small hands. Justice wasn't only a gavel striking wood, it was the life we built afterward, one full of ordinary miracles. I was left on a highway, discarded by blood, but I chose to rise, to fight, and to heal. And as I sit on the porch now, the sun sinking low and the children's laughter spilling through the open window, I know this with certainty. Betrayal may have written the beginning of my story, but it will never claim the end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.